August 26th, 1071. The morning air over the plains of Manzikert is still. No chaos, no panic, no confusion. Banners stand upright. Armor glints beneath a rising sun. An army waits, silent, disciplined, complete. At its center stands Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes, commanding the largest Byzantine field army assembled in a century. This is not a desperate gamble. This is not a reckless march. This is control. Romanos surveys the ground with the practiced eye of a soldier who understands order. Formations are tight, the center is secure, the flanks are aligned, every unit knows its place. For once, nothing is rushed. A half-second of silence hangs over the field, the kind that exists only before history fractures. Romanos does everything right. He keeps formation. He resists impulsive pursuit. He advances methodically, step by deliberate step. There is no heroic charge, no dramatic overreach, only discipline, refined by centuries of Roman war. And yet, within hours, this same army will no longer exist as a coherent force. Within days, Anatolia, the heart of the empire, will be open ground. Within years, it will be lost forever. Not because Byzantium lacked strength, but because strength was no longer enough. By the middle of the 11th century, the Byzantine Empire believed it still understood war. This belief was not arrogance, it was experience. The empire had survived the great Arab expansions. It had broken the Bulgarian Tsardom, it had outlived rivals that once seemed eternal. For centuries, Byzantine strategy had been built on a single, proven truth. Discipline defeats disorder. Formation defeats fury. Command defeats chaos. Rome did not need speed when it had structure. It did not need recklessness when it had control. And so, when the empire marched east in 1071, it did not do so in fear. It marched with confidence. This was not a campaign of survival. It was a campaign of correction. Anatolia had been raided. Borders had been tested. Local defenses had thinned. Romanos IV Diogenes did not come to gamble. He came to restore balance. He was not a ceremonial emperor. He was not a court politician playing soldier. Romanos was a professional commander, a man shaped by campaigns, logistics, and the mathematics of war. He understood restraint. He understood timing. He understood that battles are not won by emotion, but by cohesion. Under his command, the Byzantine army was assembled with care. Heavy infantry to anchor the field, elite cataphracts to deliver decisive force, mercenaries to extend reach and flexibility. This was an army designed not to chase enemies, but to impose order upon them. And that belief mattered. Because Manzikert is often remembered as a catastrophic blunder, as a failure of leadership, as a moment of imperial incompetence. It was none of those things. Romanos did not underestimate his enemy. He did not abandon discipline. He did not throw his army into chaos. The tragedy of Manzikert lies elsewhere. It lies in a deeper assumption that war itself had not changed. The Byzantine Empire believed that structure could still tame uncertainty, that formation could still dominate space, that discipline could still dictate time. For centuries, this belief had been correct. But the plains of Manzikert were not a Roman battlefield. They were not a place where lines held and decisions crystallized. They were open, wide, unforgiving. Here, control did not come from holding ground. It came from denying it. Romanos marched east believing the empire's greatest weapon, discipline, would once again bring order to chaos. He did not yet know that chaos had learned to move. And when chaos moves faster than command, even the strongest empire can lose everything without ever making a mistake. Romanos brought structure, not the illusion of order, but the real thing, the kind forged through centuries of war, reform, collapse, and survival. Under Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes, the Byzantine army did not assemble like a mob rushing toward battle. It assembled like a machine. Heavy infantry formed the spine of the force. Men trained not to chase glory, but to hold ground. They carried large shields, locked ranks, and moved as a single body. They were not fast. They were not flexible. But once planted, they were difficult to uproot. Behind and beside them waited the cataphracts, heavily armored cavalry, man and horse wrapped in steel. These were not raiders. They were not skirmishers. They were weapons of decision. When released, cataphracts were meant to end battles, to break enemy centers, shatter morale, and impose finality. Supporting them came mercenaries drawn from across the known world. Normans, aggressive, fearless, and lethal in close combat. Armenians, hardened frontier soldiers who understood rough ground. Pechenegs, steppe warriors familiar with mobile warfare, hired to counter it. This diversity was not chaos, it was reach. On paper, the numbers were overwhelming, 40 or perhaps 50,000 men, the largest Byzantine field army assembled in decades. This was not a raiding force sent to punish villages. This was not a border patrol. This was an army built for control, control of territory, control of movement, control of outcomes. And control had always been Rome's greatest weapon. The Byzantine Empire did not seek annihilation. It sought containment. It did not need to destroy every enemy. It needed only to limit them, constrain them, and eventually absorb them into a system of order. That system had worked for centuries. Empires rose and fell around Byzantium, but Byzantium endured because it believed that war, like administration, could be managed. That belief marched with Romanos onto the plains of Manzikert. Across that same plain stood an army that believed none of this. Facing Byzantium was a force built on an entirely different idea of war. The Seljuk Turks, commanded by Sultan Alp Arslan. They did not arrive in ranks. They did not anchor themselves to ground. They moved, 20 to 30,000 men, almost all mounted, almost all archers. No heavy infantry, no shield walls, no rigid formations waiting for orders. Their power was not in what they held, it was in what they denied. Seljuk warriors were born into motion. They rode before they marched. They shot before they closed. They retreated without shame and returned without warning. Where the Byzantine army required alignment, the Seljuk army thrived on separation. Each rider could fight alone. Each unit could dissolve and reform. Each retreat could become an attack. There was no center to break, because there was no center to begin with. This was not an army designed to win battles in the Roman sense. It was an army designed to outlast decisions, to stretch time, to exhaust patience, to force enemies into choices they did not want to make. Against such a force, strength mattered less than endurance. Armor mattered less than stamina. Command mattered less than adaptability. Alp Arslan understood something Rome did not yet see. That war was no longer about decisive collision. It was about duration. The Byzantine army arrived at Manzikert prepared to impose order. The Seljuk army arrived prepared to refuse it. One force needed the battlefield to remain stable. The other needed it to remain open. One sought control. The other sought freedom of movement. And on the wide plains of eastern Anatolia, movement would decide everything. Because when an army is built to stand still, and its enemy is built to move forever, the battle is already slipping out of reach, long before the first arrow is loosed. The Byzantines had more men, more armor, more history behind their banners. On parchment, the outcome should have been clear. 40 to 50,000 soldiers, organized, supplied, and commanded by an emperor who understood war. Against barely half that number, lightly armored riders drawn from the steppe. But war is not fought on parchment. It is fought in dust, distance, and exhaustion. The Byzantine army was powerful, but its power depended on conditions: cohesion, communication, synchronized movement. Every strength it possessed relied on those three elements holding together. The infantry had to maintain alignment. The cavalry had to strike at the right moment. Orders had to move faster than confusion. Break any one of those, and the machine slowed. Break all three, and it stopped. This is where Seljuk warfare began. The Seljuk riders did not charge headlong into steel. They did not test shield walls. They did not offer a center for the Byzantines to smash. Instead, they attacked the requirements of Byzantine strength. They appeared, disappeared, and reappeared at will. They struck at angles. They refused proximity. Arrows flew, not in disciplined volleys, but in relentless motion. Each shot forced shields to rise. Each maneuver forced units to adjust. Each adjustment demanded communication. And communication takes time. The Seljuks needed none of it. Their riders did not wait for horns or banners. They did not rely on fixed signals. Each man knew the rhythm of the fight instinctively. Ride, shoot, withdraw, turn, over and over again. They needed only space to move through, and time for fatigue to do its work. The battlefield itself became their ally. Every minute stretched Byzantine formations thinner. Every hour eroded discipline. Armor grew heavier. Water grew scarce. Horses slowed. Numbers remained, but cohesion began to fray. This is why numbers meant nothing, because superiority that cannot be applied is not superiority at all. It is weight, and weight becomes a burden when it cannot catch what opposes it. And still, this matters. The Byzantine army did not collapse, because Romanos IV Diogenes did not panic. He advanced carefully. His lines remained tight. The center held. The flanks stayed connected. He refused reckless pursuit, even as Seljuk riders tempted him forward. He understood the danger of overextension. He protected his core, keeping the army intact rather than chasing shadows. This is critical, because Manzikert is often told as the story of incompetence, of arrogance, of blunder. It was none of those things. Romanos did not abandon discipline. He did not lose control. He did not throw his army into chaos. He fought exactly as a Byzantine commander was trained to fight: measured, deliberate, controlled. But that is precisely the tragedy, because Romanos was not fighting badly. He was fighting the wrong type of war. Romanos sought decision, a moment where lines met, where shock overcame resistance, where discipline imposed order on uncertainty. That was how Rome had always won. Across the field, Sultan Alp Arslan sought something else entirely. He sought duration. Not a single decisive clash, but a long erosion of will. Not victory in one moment, but advantage accumulated over hours. Where Romanos needed the battle to end, Alp Arslan needed it to continue. Every minute the fight dragged on favored the Seljuks. Every hour sapped Byzantine strength. Armor became a liability. Formation became a constraint. Discipline became rigidity. The steppe does not reward rigidity. It rewards those who control time. Romanos believed that if he held firm, the enemy would eventually be forced to commit. That once committed, Seljuk light cavalry would shatter against Roman steel. It was a logical assumption. It was also fatal. Because the Seljuks were never going to commit. They were going to wait. Wait for fatigue. Wait for frustration. Wait for the moment when control itself became unsustainable. Only one of these philosophies could survive the open plains of Manzikert. Decision or duration. And on the steppe, time does not belong to the army that stands firm. It belongs to the army that never has to stand still. The Seljuks did not charge. They circled. No thunder of hooves crashing into shields. No reckless surge towards steel and discipline. Instead, they moved like a tightening horizon. Always present, never fixed. Arrows began to fall, not in synchronized volleys, not in dramatic storms meant to decide a moment, but endlessly. One shot, then another still. Each arrow was small, each impact insignificant by itself. But war is not decided by individual blows. Every shot forced shields to rise. Every raised shield slowed the march. Every adjustment rippled down the line. The Byzantine formation held. That is important. The line did not break. The center did not collapse. The flanks did not panic. Roman discipline did exactly what it was designed to do. But discipline has a cost. Holding formation consumes strength. Holding shields drains arms. Holding ground drains patience. Minutes passed, then hours. The sun climbed higher. Armor trapped heat, dust-coated throats. The Seljuks spent almost nothing. They rode light. They carried minimal armor. They drank when they wished. They rested while moving. Their arrows were not meant to kill quickly. They were meant to wear time itself into a weapon. This was not pressure applied at a single point. It was pressure applied everywhere, slowly. The Byzantine army became a fortress standing in an open plain. Strong, impressive, and increasingly isolated. The longer it held, the heavier it became. Across the field, Sultan Alp Arslan watched. He did not seek an opening. He created inevitability. Then the rhythm changed. The Seljuk riders began to pull away. Not suddenly, not chaotically, slowly, deliberately. The circling widened. The arrows thinned. The pressure eased. To Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes, it looked disciplined, but real. This mattered, because seasoned commanders recognize panic. They recognize disorder. They recognize collapse. What Romanos saw was none of those things. The Seljuk withdrawal appeared controlled, but genuine. A force disengaging before it lost cohesion. In Roman doctrine, this meant opportunity. The battlefield, after hours of pressure, was finally offering clarity. This was not a trap born of chaos. It was a trap born of patience. Romanos faced a decision. Remain stationary and allow the enemy to disengage, or advance and convert endurance into advantage. The order to move forward was logical. It followed every principle Roman commanders had been taught for centuries. An enemy withdrawing in order can still be pressured. A disciplined advance can force decision. A controlled push can turn endurance into victory. Romanos did not command recklessly. He commanded correctly, and that correctness made the outcome unavoidable. The Byzantine army moved forward. At first, nothing seemed wrong. The center advanced as one. The banners held alignment. The formation remained intact. But movement changed everything. Distance stretched between units. The line lengthened. The flanks thinned. What had been a compact machine became an extended body. Formation began to turn into space. The Seljuks did not flee faster. They fled just slowly enough. Each step forward by the Byzantines demanded another step. Each additional step required more coordination. Each adjustment weakened cohesion. The further the Byzantines advanced, the more they surrendered the one thing that protected them: density. Roman discipline was designed to hold, not to chase. As the army pressed on, the battlefield widened. Signals took longer to reach their targets. Commands lagged behind events. The distance between intent and execution grew, and that distance is where the steppe lives. The Seljuks did not need to turn and fight. They needed only to wait until the Byzantine army stopped being a single object and became many. The false retreat was not a trick. It was an invitation to abandon the only condition under which Roman power functioned. Romanos accepted it, not because he was foolish, but because refusing it meant surrendering initiative. And in Roman warfare, surrendering initiative was itself a kind of defeat. So the army moved, forward, outward, longer. until the lines that once held firm began to bend, not from fear, but from geometry. The Seljuks had not defeated the Byzantines. They had convinced them to defeat their own formation. And as the sun began its slow descent, the battlefield was no longer a single line of Roman order, but a stretched, exposed shape waiting to be closed. The arrows would return, but now they would come from everywhere. As the sun began to fall, the battlefield changed its nature. Not suddenly, not violently, but decisively. The Seljuks turned. From both sides, what had been distance became direction. What had been movement became intent. The riders who had spent hours circling now curved inward, not toward the Byzantine center, but behind it. A crescent began to form, wide at first, almost invisible, then tightening. This was not a charge, it was geometry. The Byzantine army, stretched forward by pursuit, did not immediately understand what was happening. There was no wall of enemies rushing in, no single moment of impact. Instead, arrows returned. From the left, from the right, from the rear. They struck from angles the Byzantine formations were never designed to face. There was no enemy line to engage, no center to break, no flank to roll, only motion and fire. Commanders tried to respond. Banners were raised, horns were sounded. But signals require visibility. Invisibility had vanished. Dust hung thick in the air. The sun sat low on the horizon, blinding those who turned toward it. Noise drowned meaning. Orders reached some units and never reached others. The distance between formations became isolation. Isolation became confusion. This was not panic. It was something worse. The Byzantine army did not collapse. It dissolved. Units remained disciplined, but disconnected. Soldiers held formation, but with no reference point. Strength still existed, but could not be applied. Each group fought its own battle, unaware that the battle itself was already over. The Seljuks did not need to destroy the Byzantine army. They only needed to prevent it from ever becoming whole again. This was the moment when control vanished, not stolen, not shattered, simply made irrelevant. Across the field, Sultan Alp Arslan did not press for immediate annihilation. He did not gamble on a single overwhelming strike. He allowed the crescent to close at its own pace. Time, once again, did the work. At the center of the field stood Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes. He still commanded men. He still issued orders. But an emperor commands through structure, and structure was gone. Then came the final rupture. The Byzantine reserve withdrew. Whether it was treachery, or fear, or political calculation, history has never fully agreed. But on the battlefield, debate did not matter. What mattered was absence. The reserve had been the final anchor, the force meant to restore balance if the line bent too far. When it pulled away, the center was left exposed. Romanos found himself increasingly isolated. Units that should have been within reach were suddenly distant. Messengers did not return. Commands went unanswered. The emperor fought on, not as a symbol, but as a soldier. Surrounded by his guard, he attempted to regroup, to reassert control. But control cannot be summoned once it has dissolved. The Seljuks closed in, not in a wild rush, but in tightening arcs. Romanos was surrounded, not overwhelmed by numbers, not crushed by force, simply cut off from time, wounded, exhausted, still resisting. Until resistance no longer mattered, he was captured alive. For the first time in centuries, a Roman emperor became a prisoner in open battle, not dragged from his palace, not seized in a coup, but taken on the field by an enemy who had not needed to defeat him directly. The capture was not the climax of chaos. It was the quiet confirmation of inevitability. The Seljuks did not celebrate wildly. They understood the meaning of what had just occurred. An emperor captured did not end an empire in a single day, but it shattered something far more fragile than armies. Confidence. The Byzantine army still existed in fragments. Men still fought their way free. Banners still fluttered in pockets of resistance. But the war had already changed, because Manzikert was not decided by betrayal alone, nor by a single mistake, nor by a moment of panic. It was decided by a battlefield that rewarded movement over mass, time over strength, adaptation over discipline. When the crescent closed, it did not merely surround an army. It closed around an idea of war that no longer belonged to the future. And when Romanos IV Diogenes was led away in chains, Byzantium did not yet know it. But the empire had just lost more than a battle. It had lost the ground beneath its feet. Manzikert was not catastrophic because of the men who died that day. Empires have survived worse slaughters. They have rebuilt armies. They have replaced generals. Manzikert was catastrophic because of what it unlocked. When the dust settled, the Byzantine army was wounded, but not annihilated. Survivors regrouped. Units withdrew. Banners were gathered. Yet something far more important had been lost. Anatolia, the empire's heartland, not a distant frontier, not a contested border, but the land that fed the army, the land that produced soldiers, the land that connected Constantinople to its strength. After Manzikert, Anatolia lay open. No defensive walls stretched across its breadth. No intact field armies remained strong enough to contest it. What Byzantium had lost was not territory in a single blow, but the ability to say no. Seljuk tribes did not storm cities en masse. They did not launch a grand invasion with banners and proclamations. They entered, quietly, gradually, inevitably. Families followed herds. Warriors followed pasture. Settlements appeared where Roman garrisons once stood. This was not conquest as Byzantium understood it. This was occupation without battle, and Byzantium never forced them out. The empire tried. It raised new armies. It negotiated. It bribed. It maneuvered. But the conditions that had allowed Rome to control Anatolia were gone. There was no decisive battlefield left to win, no single enemy army to defeat. Anatolia had slipped from being a Roman space into becoming a Seljuk one. Not by fire, but by time. That is why Manzikert was final, because it transformed a military defeat into a strategic impossibility. And this is where the true lesson of Manzikert begins. Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes did not lose because he was incompetent. He did not lose because he was reckless. He did not lose because he misunderstood his own army. He lost because the rules of war had shifted beneath his feet. Romanos believed in discipline, and discipline had saved the Byzantine Empire for centuries. Discipline had defeated stronger enemies. It had survived chaos. It had imposed order on uncertainty. But discipline cannot defeat mobility when mobility controls time. The Seljuks did not need to be stronger. They needed only to be unavoidable. They chose when to fight. They chose to withdraw. They chose to return. Romanos sought decision, a moment where structure would prevail. Alp Arslan sought duration, a process where structure would exhaust itself. Only one of those philosophies survives the step. Manzikert teaches a brutal truth. An empire can make no obvious mistakes and still choose the wrong war. It can prepare correctly, deploy logically, command competently, and yet lose everything because it fights for control in a world that rewards movement. This is the danger of inherited success. Byzantium had won for so long that it believed victory itself was permanent. But war does not honor tradition. It honors adaptation. On August 26, 1071, Byzantium did not fall. Its cities still stood. Its capital still glittered. Its emperors still ruled. But something changed forever. The empire stopped advancing. It stopped shaping the future and began reacting to it. From that moment on, Byzantium would defend, negotiate, delay. It would survive, remarkably so. But it would never again dominate Anatolia. And empires that stop advancing do not collapse overnight. They endure. They contract. They remember. Until one day history realizes they have been counting their remaining years.